At times, in interviews, we may face some awkward small talk, which leaves us baffled, or to say the least, dumbfounded. And in one of those, the interviewer just made a statement. You must have relished your downtime during your maternity leave, right? It's quite busy here at the office.
Oh, those obligatory small talks. I wish someone would tell them. You bet. I cherish those sleepless days and nights, lost track of when I comb my hair last, and of course, full of diapers and baby stuff in my purse.
So true. But then what did you actually say?
Oh, but instead, I just grin like a jackass because this is not one would expect. It's quite off the track.
Definitely and totally avoidable question, by the way. Huh? Another one that I got. Huh? I hope you're not planning to get pregnant in the next 1 or 2 years, huh? Because these are very critical years for the business for us. It was kind of setting expectations, but really not with a casual tone.
That's an odd question to say the least. I wouldn't know how to respond without sounding harsh.
Oh, you should have sweetly said, I have plans to grow a garden with water lilies and unique orchid species. And yeah, get two Labradors too.
Yeah, I wish I had met you then, Neha, for sure. But in reality, I felt so embarrassed and I didn't know actually how to respond. I kind of cringed, smiled weakly at him, and then just did a half hearted nod. Hello and welcome to this podcast, Flourish, with Deepthi and me, Selva. Whoever you are, wherever you're from, and whatever you do, this is the show that helps you not just restart confidently, but also thrive and flourish in your second careers.
If you are thinking of restarting your career but don't know where to begin, you have come to the right place. In this season, we'll deep dive into the world of returnees by bringing you expert interviews, research findings, and HR perspectives. Being returnees ourselves, we will be sharing our experiences of restarting, both failure and success stories.
That's right. If you are wondering how to build that awesome resume or ace that dream job interview and even get an insider tip from HRs on getting hired, all that and more, we've got it all covered in this podcast just for you.
So, are you ready? Because it's time for you to flourish.
Tune in to Flourish, a one of a kind podcast meant just for you folks returning to work.
I am Deepthi Rao, a techie by profession, mentor by passion, and a certified happiness coach.
And I am Selvakani Selvaraj, a corporate HR expert, trained coach for career success, and a certified psychologist. We both are corporate professionals with over 40 years of collective experience. We know what it takes to build, pause, and rebuild a successful career, all the while being parents, caregivers, and family nurturers.
Welcome to yet another episode of Season 1.
We all know this. It's your resume that gets you the interview. So pat on your back because your hard work in building that resume has really paid off. It's now time to celebrate your first win.
It's your performance at the interview that gets you the job. It takes a mere 7 seconds to make that first impression. More than explicit vocal assertions, people judge based on appearances and body language.
Yes. And that's why we spoke about building confidence, having the right body language, and presenting yourself appropriately in an interview setting in our previous episodes. In this episode, we double down on how to ace those interviews right from the horse's mouth, so to say, because we have Neha Parashar to our show right now, who's a sought after professional coach over 2 decades of experience across coaching and HR roles in companies like GE Capital, DuPont, and Cisco.
Neha now works as an independent executive and career coach for experienced professionals in the corporate sector. She is also a career coach and advisor to US diplomatic family members in the South Asia and Near East regional countries. Welcome to our podcast, Neha.
Thank you, Deepthi, and thank you, Selva, for inviting me.
So, Neha, let's start with what are the typical interview challenges that you have seen people face when they are returning to the workforce, especially so for a woman returning to work?
Deepthi, the challenges may vary based on reasons of taking a break and the duration of the break itself. If the break is a short one, say of a few months to a year, rejoining could be less challenging. Then, of course, the reason of the break, was it voluntary or involuntary? Was it due to personal reasons, layoff? So, whatever the reason was. But since we are talking about returning to work, and for women especially, we know there is enough data and even by observation that many women choose to take a career break due to personal reasons. They could be prioritizing family or caregiving, motherhood, or supporting the spouse's career. And these breaks typically are for longer durations as well. So, coming to the challenge, while the challenge could be distinct for every individual situation, I believe the common challenge that runs across most is not external, but actually internal. It is being defensive about the break itself, and it is their self doubts. So they're thinking, how will I explain the gap? How will I show I have relevant skills? Can I still interview well? How will I adapt to the new environment? So many self doubts. Of course, you may face interviewers who are biased against the break, but that is an area outside of your circle of control. Within your circle of control, I think self doubt and defensiveness are typical internal challenges that a lot of candidates face.
That's a new insight, Neha, because most often the focus is really about dealing with external challenges, even more about the bias. And it's a very popular topic to also talk about, more than the not so obvious internal ones that you mentioned. What are your suggestions for returnees to overcome these self doubts and defensiveness during an interview setting?
Let's talk about defensiveness first, Selva. So, first, I would like to reiterate that there is no rule book or the 11th commandment that says, thou shalt be employed in a job for every single day of the next 40 years of your life. So, careers are a part of life, not the other way around. And sometimes to manage the latter, one has to take a break from the former. Now, the good thing is that experienced recruiters and most good employers now understand this. So, good employers now are focusing on employee well being and work life integration. They realize that they will lose out or fail to tap into an excellent talent pool of experienced people if they ignore anyone who has had a career break. Also, career breaks are becoming more and more common now across all genders, not just women. So do not listen to the naysayers. And often that naysayer is our own self talk that you need to justify your break or be defensive about it. Own up your break with confidence. The next thing is self doubt. All the questions around, will I be able to? Will I be able to do this? Will I be able to do that? Well, there's a lot that you can do to work on this. I'm trying to keep my answer focused just on the interview for now. I would recommend preparation. There's no better antidote to self doubt than that. Prepare for your interview. And this may involve identifying the roles and organizations that you're really interested in so that your conviction is visible, researching about the company, studying the requirements of the role, and preparing to demonstrate your strengths and skills in relevance to that. Also, keep in mind, be realistic. You may not get selected in some interviews. Don't believe you necessarily did not get selected just because you're coming back from a break, unless you've specifically received this feedback from the recruiter. Having a flaw fixation will keep you from not noticing other areas where you can improve your interview performance.
That's true, Neha. One failed interview round, and we start attributing it to our career break. Don't assume or judge your career break negatively. The employer may not even have any concerns, and it may not even be the real issue. Neha, can you elaborate a little bit more on how does one answer when asked about the career break?
Sure. As I shared earlier, own your break with confidence and answer truthfully. There is no reason to be evasive. Next, and very importantly, answer succinctly and authentically about the break, and then move the discussion towards a forward-looking direction and talk about your interest in coming back and why you're so keen on this role and employer. Be prepared to show off your strengths in the best possible light, not dwell on the break or what is missing on your CV.
That's another great insight, Neha. We ran a poll, in fact, on LinkedIn last week about the toughest question women returnees face. Interestingly, addressing career break concerns topped the list. And with the insights you just shared now, it gets much easier to ace those questions for sure. The other typical interview question is this broad: tell me about yourself when you start the interview. How should one prepare for it? And how different is this from the famous elevator pitch?
See, the elevator pitches come from a time when there was actually a chance to bump into someone in the elevator, and then you had only 30 to 60 seconds to introduce yourself and find a foothold for another conversation later. So that was the purpose of the elevator pitch. So yes, please do that if you actually bump into someone important in the elevator, even now. But with tell me about yourself, you have more luxury. The other party has a lot more information about you already through your CV, your LinkedIn profile, and so on. And you know that they're already interested in you because that is why you've been called for the interview. And of course, you also have the luxury of time. You have more than 30 seconds. So that's the difference between the elevator pitch and tell me about yourself.
That's an interesting anecdote, Neha. Now, I have this question about the length of the introduction and what info is really relevant. The reason behind this question is, either in our enthusiasm, we may have really long stories weaved into the introduction, or due to lack of confidence, we may shy away from the actual highlights. What is your suggestion on this, Neha?
You're right about both, Deepti, about long stories or as well as too short answers. So my suggestion is to not ramble so long that the other party starts getting bored, but also not keep your answer so short that you miss out on using the opportunity well enough. So some candidates waste this opportunity by repeating their CV all over again. That's not required. They already have your CV. They've read through it and called you for the interview. This is your chance to set the stage for the rest of the interview and start strong by directing the interviewers specifically to areas of your strengths that are relevant to them. So other than a very brief synopsis of your education and career history, include things like why you are interested in this role, and do include an achievement or two or mention skills that are specifically relevant to this role. If you see that they are interested, you could even ask permission to elaborate more. This way, you are, one, directing the interviewers to areas that show you in a strong light. And this is using this opportunity to keep the interviewers interested. And yes, if you're comfortable, I would recommend also including a little personal tidbit that makes you memorable. For example, I once interviewed a candidate who the panel started referring to as that candidate who plays in the band, right? So that became like a moniker for him. And he developed a recall in the interview panel. They could discuss him easily. So that little tidbit made him memorable. So you could also try introducing a little personal tidbit like that. Another good way that I can suggest is to partner with the interviewer and actually ask them what is it that they would be most interested to hear, and then structure your answer accordingly.
That's great. So really ask the interviewer, what would you like to know about me? In similar parlance, there is enough data in the resume about the past experience and the achievements associated with that, right? However, sometimes it can be unnerving to recollect the finer details of the past success stories impactfully in an interview setting. So what's your suggestion on how to summarize earlier achievements succinctly and yet keeping it relevant for the role?
So great question, Selva. This definitely requires preparation. You can't leave it to start thinking about it during the course of the interview. You have to do this preparation beforehand about thinking about these. And I realize that, if somebody has been on a long break, it may be difficult to recollect some of these details. So some suggestions I can make around that is tap into your previous performance appraisals or earlier versions of your CV, assuming you have saved them. But in case the break is a long one and you do not have these handy, another source that you could be tapping into is talking to your previous boss or ex-colleagues as to what they remember you for. I would also suggest trying some backward visualization. Think about your high moments in the previous roles. What are some of the happy memories? What emotions are associated with those events? As you start thinking about these, you will be able to think of some skills that helped you and that you applied in those situations. So start building your story from there. Another exercise, if you don't have access to any of this, is to start reading a few job descriptions of the kind of roles that you're applying to, and go point by point to think of whether you have had similar or somewhat similar experiences in your past. This could also help you recollect some details about your previous work.
Very valid ones, Neha. Be prepared, to answer these before attending the interview. Sometimes we get an opportunity to ask a few questions to the interviewer itself. How can we make good use of this?
A great question, Deepti, and a very important one, because asking questions is a great opportunity for the candidate to show their interest and curiosity about the role to the employer. My two suggestions here are, if you can keep that in mind, one, ask questions with the mindset that you've already got the job. So you could discuss the job itself, challenges in it, opportunities, what resources might be available, what are the expectations from the incumbent, and so on. Two, always customize your questions based on who you're talking to, what their position is, and at what stage of the interview are you having that conversation. So the questions you ask the first level recruiter can't be the same as those you will ask the business head or a senior leader. So keep that distinction in mind.
I loved your analogy of asking questions like you've already gotten the job. That's a gold mine for me. That mindset will help the person to be naturally curious and confident in asking those questions, and really not to please the interviewer or make an impression, because the purpose is beyond that. One last question before we shift gears, Neha. If you were to share one secret recipe for cracking the interview, what would that be?
There's no recipe, Selva, and there's no secret. But I can suggest, since you're talking about recipes, I can suggest two seasonings, and the very simplest, which everybody has access to: salt and pepper. So remember salt, S, focus on your strengths, not what is missing. And P for pepper, but remember it as P for prepare. So S and P, salt and pepper, focus on your strengths and prepare.
Salt and pepper, everybody's favorite. I will say S for simple, P for powerful. Strengths and preparation, superb. I will change lanes a little bit now and ask you to shed a little bit light on the interviewer mindset. What are the common mistakes that interviewers can avoid while interviewing women returnees?
Well, I believe all the practices, processes, and etiquette of good interviewing apply in any interview, whether it is for women returnees or anybody at all. So, of course, practicing, interview training, practice, process, follow all of the good etiquette and practices that your organization has trained you for. Just two suggestions, rather requests to interviewers, if I may. One is be future focused on what the candidate can bring, not on their career break. And two, don't judge the career break through your own lens of priorities and motivations. These are the only two things that I would appeal to interviewers to keep in mind.
Good appeals, I must say, Neha. Lots of great insights from these conversations from you. And as we close this interview, if each of us were to share one key takeaway for our listeners about interviews, what would you say? Deepti?
All the world's a stage, so it's your career show to be played out in a nutshell within the given time limit of 30 to 45 minutes. Neha?
Just two words: go prepared. If you want a third word, strengths.
Wonderful. I'd say relax, take an actual breath, breathe, and remember that the interviewer is just another person sitting across from you. And you know it better. Interviews are not about just answering questions. It's an opportunity for you to build a connection.
You must have heard this ad. डर सबको लगता है, गला सबका सूखता है, right? All of us have that hesitation and initial fear of interviews. But to taste the success, you have to move beyond it.
Absolutely. Because your career break does not define you. What defines you is who you are and what you want to be. With that, it's time now for us to wrap up and say thank you to Neha for sharing her expert views with us. It was wonderful having you on our show.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Neha.
Thank you, Deepthi, and thank you, Selva. You asked such interesting questions, and I really enjoyed this interaction. I hope your listeners are taking away something that they can apply right away, and I would like to wish them the very best as they plan to re enter the workforce.
Your feedback is our inspiration. Be generous with your rating. We love 5-star ratings because it will help us reach many more women who are looking for that inspiration to restart. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to Flourish.
We hope you liked our podcast. All we do in this podcast is to have meaningful conversations, speak to experts, and bring you the real deal, the real stories of returnship. Look up our show notes for our social media connects and research links.
Why just survive when you can thrive and flourish in your career?
Amen to that. Bye, folks. Until the next time in our next episode.